host, Noel McDermott. Got a great guest tonight. Sean Alexander is going to launch his second book today, which is really cool. So we're going to be talking about Sean and what he does, and he's sort of in the sober field, as it were. He's sober himself, and it's a appropriate topic as tomorrow is the 1st of December, and so officially people go insane around drink from tomorrow. And so here's a sobering message this evening to try and pull you back from the brink of madness around all this stuff. Not that we're anti-drink, but we are anti sort of having your head stoved in by some drunk down the high street. So do look after yourselves, people. It's live if you're listening to this on a Wednesday evening on the 30th of November from 9 o'clock UK time, whatever time is where you are. So do join, send us a message on WhatsApp, +44 7506 319 745. I say WhatsApp just in case you're outside of the UK. It'll save you a bit of money. And you can even call as well. But please do get in touch. And James, who's hiding, skulking away in the background somewhere, my techie, will be surfing the various platforms that we go out live on to see if there's any commentary there, and you can share it with me. So that's enough of me. And over to you, Sean. Hello, Sean. How are you doing? Welcome.
I'm all right, thank you. Thanks for having us on.
It's been a big day today for you, I think, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been very busy. So yeah, the second book launched today. And it's being self-published. I literally do everything.
Yes.
So it's just like a marketing, just chasing everyone from the early reviews to leave their reviews on Amazon. So I think everyone in my sober groups a bit fed up of me banging the drum every day at the minute.
Well, I think it's great stuff. I've thought about writing a book myself, but I'm basically very lazy because I know it's really hard work. And so I'm very impressed that you've done two. So well done you. And you're part of, you set up Sober on a Drunk Planet. Is that right? That's the name of your website and the overall scheme that you're part of that you set up.
Yeah, so it was originally it was a friend's Instagram handle, and I just thought when I was writing the book, I had to come up with something that was catchy that hadn't been used before, and I thought, yeah, that sort of sums how my sobriety feels. You sort of have these realizations about all the false beliefs you had when you were drinking, and you think, that's crazy. It's crazy. I thought, well, that was normal. And then, that just went into the book titles and then also into the Facebook group as well.
Okay, so you got sober yourself through treatment, although it's not necessary for people to do it, but that was your route, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But sort of maybe something about sort of your story about getting to the point where you needed help might be interesting for people to hear about. So, what was it like before you got sober?
Yeah, it's strange looking back at it because it is nothing really that traumatic that people might assume. So it's only a case of going to rehab and then unraveling everything. It all then becomes a bit clearer. So I've grown up in Wimbledon, Southwest London, my whole life.
Because I think it's a really important statement that, it's not like you had a big neon sign on your head saying I've got a problem. You actually existed within a culture that it seemed okay until it wasn't okay, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. My breaking point was at a position where everyone else was still carrying on. Presumably they were fine. And it's difficult when you're in that position not to draw comparisons to other people.
So let's go back a little bit in time, if you don't mind, and just talk about some of your earlier experiences in life, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what makes a drunk or an alcoholic. I don't know which term you prefer. It's entirely up to you how you just sort of define your experience of your drinking times. But I think I find it really helpful to hear something about those stories. So because it may feed into, or it may bust some of the myths that exist. So you come from a stable-ish family, I presume?
Yeah, so mum and dad's driving instructor, previously worked for a photography company. My mum's half Italian, half English, very family orientated. No brothers or sisters. I was adopted at birth. And yeah, I've just grown up in a very fortunate part of the world. Wimbledon's lovely.
We were talking just before the show. Does that mean you had an abandonment problem because you're adopted?
Yeah, that's the thing. My therapist, when I was in rehab, kept prodding the question,
sure
but
did.
I've always been told by mum and dad that I was adopted. So it really hasn't felt like it's made that was a cause for concern from my point of view. Mum and dad have always been very clear that if you want to meet your adoptive family, then we've got all the things, because it was done through at the time the Children's Catholic Society.
Yeah.
So yeah, from that point of view, I'd never wanted to use anything as an excuse to the reasons why I did anything. But
you never really felt abandoned, did you? I mean, you might have manufactured the feelings for your therapist, but just to keep him happy. But you never had that feeling. You were loved and supported by your parents.
Yeah, I guess probably the if I'm being really honest, my parents at the time. So my author name's Sean Alexander. My actual real name, my surname's Gay. So contrary to popular belief, people would always ask, has it got an E on the end? I was like, for the amount of abuse I got when I was at school, it doesn't really make any difference.
That's right. You can just imagine the bullies at school going, no, it's got an E on the end. We won't take the piss out of him this time.
Yeah. So to be honest, I was very unfortunate. I think that played a massive role in my anxiety that I developed from a very young age, because I was bullied every day, every register. And there's 5 registers, 6 registers a day. So my parents,
but it must have been absolutely horrific, to be honest.
It was, and to be honest, because I never understood what anxiety felt like. I think the only sense of abandonment that I had, looking back at it, was I would say that I'm really upset. Like, can I change his surname? To some extent, I think my parents thought I was joking, and they lived in a different era with the surname actually meant happy. So they couldn't contemplate what that was doing to me. I had no brothers or sisters, so it was very much me on my own as a child, trying to figure out why I kept on getting bullied and why I couldn't change that situation. So I guess from that point of view, I just felt I couldn't really do anything. So then you just absorb all the abuse all the time, because being non-reactive is the only thing that you can do.
Yeah. Try and sort of pretend it's not happening and pretend it's having no effect, in the hope that people will go away. But often I think in those situations, when you are non-reactive, it eggs people on in a weird sort of way. They get even more activated and by your lack of response. So, I mean, that's, did you ever talk to your parents about it and they just didn't understand? And
Yeah, I think the few times I did, it just was like, I always call it the pull your socks up generation. It's a post-war mentality where you don't want to show weakness, so you just get on with it. My dad's, for all intents and purposes, beautiful man, will always help everyone and anyone. But he was part of a rugby club. So you've got that whole male pride thing as well. So I think to some extent, changing surname was never going to be a thing that was going to happen.
Yeah, no, I get it. My stepfather, Alf, who's been dead a long time, he was very much of that generation. In fact, he drove tanks in North Africa during World War II. I know, I only found out about it because I was reading Spike Milligan's book, Hitler, My Part in His Downfall, Part 2, which was chronicling his time in the war. And he talked about frying eggs on the tank because it was so hot. And I was laughing away, and my stepdad said, "What are you laughing at?" And I went, describe. He said, "Yeah, that's what we did." I went, "What, you drove tanks?" He said, "Yeah." And that's how I knew about it, because he never talked about it. He never talked about anything, to be honest. But he was a lovely bloke. genuinely kind and loving, but he didn't have a Scooby about this stuff, to be honest.
Yeah.
Sort of passed him over. But I guess if you've grown up in a war and being bombed and all that sort of stuff, that sort of makes sense, doesn't it? That you don't really notice stuff like this. So I'm definitely of the snowflake generation. I don't mind. I'm quite happy with that. Quite happy being a snowflake, to be honest. So school, I guess, was quite difficult and challenging and maybe quite isolating in some ways as well. If you were bullied, that's often what happens to the victims.
Yeah, I think I've got mixed memories of how I was receiving it at that age, but looking back at it, I think there was a lot more weight behind how I ended up in rehab because of those early days. And it's just something that I never had the chance to think about or try and work through until I went to rehab, because I never asked for help. That was another thing that I never did.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't have done in those days as well. I mean, even now, you'd be a bit ropey getting good anti-bullying stuff, and I'd hope teachers would notice. But you know, it's a bit hit and miss still. What's interesting for me from a psychological perspective is that schools have similar attachment processes to families, oddly enough. So, you know, when I was in social services, we were looking at protective factors. If kids were in school, even if they had an abusive family, school would hopefully be better and would protect them and repair family damage. With you, it's the other way around. You had a nice family and then school kicked you in the head, which is really unfortunate, to be honest, that happened. But yes, it would have a similar impact, what I'm saying, in terms of attachment and psychology. It would have a similar impact to being in an abusive family.
Okay.
Because of the psychological processes involved. And so then you did school. I suppose you got through it as quickly as possible. Did you go to college and stuff like that, or did you go into work?
Yeah, went to college, did all right, and then got into Nottingham Uni, and went through all that, and then went into working in finance afterwards.
And
very
when
much.
did the drinking start in all of that?
So it started, I think, about 14. It wasn't necessarily often at 14, but that was the first time I remember going to the pub. Because back then you didn't get ID'd, no one really cared, and it was sort of normal, I guess. Because all my classmates
is the term I prefer.
Yeah.
You normalize unhealthy behaviour, definitely.
And then the drinking from day one was the same as the drinking on the last day. So it was only till I got to rehab that I could see all the patterns of drinking, and trace it all the way back to the first time and realise actually my the habit of drinking had never changed.
Yeah, I'm just going to take a moment, if you don't mind, just to intervene in the story a little bit and just give a public information broadcast. So for anybody who's listening to this idea of drinking before the age of 16 is an absolute disaster. So the medical advice is quite clear that nobody under the age of 16 should drink alcohol, because it has a profound neurological impact, which means that you're more likely to have all sorts of mental health problems, including addiction. And you should really, if a parent's listening to this and you're wondering, should you do that ridiculous French method that people talk about, you know, watered down wine from the age of 12, the evidence is absolutely unequivocal that you are setting your child up for a disastrous relationship to alcohol neurologically. So it shouldn't be normalized. Do not give kids under 16 alcohol. That's it. That's the clear evidence. And between 16 and 21, there should only be supervised access, which I know a lot of people are just going, what are you talking about, Noel? 18, 16, 7, you know, but it's the truth. These are medical facts. And if you go to the US, in most US states, you can't purchase alcohol under 21. The ID laws are quite clear. And the reason for that is they're much more litigious in the States. And so the psychological and other damage that's done from drinking prior to the age of 21 can result in a lawsuit. against the alcohol outlets, and it has done. And they've suffered millions in the same way that lawsuits are taken out against tobacco companies. And I think we'll see it in the UK, but that's the public health bit done. Sorry, Sean, carry on with your story.
Fine, or just don't drink at all. Might be easier.
Like since 2015, we've had a public health campaign aimed at kids, telling them to leave alcohol alone. Since 2015, the number of kids using alcohol has dropped off by 20%. So the aim is definitely to stop kids drinking, and we are successful in exactly the same way that we've convinced people to stop smoking. It's sort of, once the damage is done, it's a different intervention is needed, but the prevention stuff is already happening and it's already successful. And actually there's a burgeoning sober movement amongst young people who have the same reaction to drinking as kids have to, say, seeing somebody smoke. They just go, ugh. Which is the reaction, I think, is the only healthy reaction to it, to be honest. Anyway, so you started, and when you say that your drinking at the beginning was the same as at the end, do you mean you drank in an unhealthy way, or can you sort of say what that was like?
Yeah, I just think the easiest way to say it is that there is no off button.
Right.
Yeah, literally no off button. It's just a case of you drink until you wake up the next day, hopefully at home.
Okay. And it's really that random with you when you drink. You sort of don't know where you're going to be or what's going to have happened.
Yeah, I think when I was younger, it was a case of I'd ring mum and dad, not really knowing where I was, and the amount of stories there are from them. It's unconditional love, because why would you keep picking up your son at like 2 o'clock in the morning on a student uni night in Kingston, in the middle of a council estate, and just the amount of times I'd throw up when I was at home on my own. Like, you hear the horror stories of people choking on their own vomit. Yeah. And that is something that could have easily happened. It just happens that I wasn't at the wrong angle. And it just becomes
random, I think. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and it was all the time, because I couldn't stomach alcohol. It was the same at uni when I was there as an adult, which was scary, because I had all the money from all the student loans and all the banks that were giving you credit cards, and I just did what I wanted for 3 years, which was dangerous.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you made it out alive. So congratulations. Then you went into work, and you chose what? An industry where sort of tanking up was okay.
Yes, but I worked in pensions, so it's not quite
okay.
When I say to people,
it wasn't Wolf of Wall Street. It was
no, not really. And I don't necessarily think it's. I think it's stress related, because they're high paid jobs, brokers, and it's the high stress that goes with it, the long hours, and but yeah, I guess mine was more just being in London. London's the sort of cocaine capital of the world. There's pubs everywhere as well, so that sort of toxic mix of alcohol and drugs keeps you up for longer, and then the drugs sort of. At the time, I thought they were the answer to having the blackouts from the drinking, and I didn't throw up when I was doing cocaine. There's no sense
in which having a blackout was unhealthy. It's like, maybe it's a drink. No, hang on, I'll take another drug to push the blackout down the road a little bit. It's like, yeah, that is insane. I mean, it is absolutely bonkers. Brilliant though. And then
strange enough, the drug dealer at the time, I said, I'm really struggling sleeping. Like, I've been doing so much cocaine. He's like, the best thing that I do is I down 2 bottles of wine, and that puts me right back to sleep. And I'm like, taking health advice off of a drug dealer.
I can't tell you how many times I've heard that sort of story. It's like, I'm trying to think. There was a film in which I think it might have been in Wolf of Wall Street, where they had various. No, it was. Have you seen that? It's Flight. You seen that film with Denzel Washington?
I might have done.
It's he plays an airline captain that does this miraculous save of an aeroplane that's crashing, but he somehow flips it over, lands it, and saves everybody's life. But the issue is he's an active alcoholic, so he's actually pissed when he's doing it. Right. And so he's this hero, but he manages to stay sober for a while. But then there's this hilarious scene, which is tragic, of he's got to go in to give his evidence, and he gets trashed. And so his drug dealer comes and opens up his case, like a medical case, and there's various compounds, and he gives them a little bit of this for an upper, a little bit of that for a down, a little bit of this to stabilize him. And it's like a classic pastiche of every drug scene I've ever heard about as a clinician, because this is what people tell me. They go, yeah, and then look, I lost control of that, but then I used this to control that, and then I lost control of that, and I used this to control that. Then I messed up my pattern in this way. Then I made myself really depressed, so I then added that into the mix until people are doing a whole pharmacy. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's crazy stuff, absolutely crazy stuff. So you were getting this advice from your dealers, you do that to get up, this, do this to get down. What did you end up mixing? Can you remember in the end what the mix was?
So I guess predominantly my addiction was cocaine towards the end.
Right.
I moved to Sydney for a short period just to get away from everything and try and fix myself, which you can never run away from your problems. They follow
we call
you.
it geographical today, don't we? Do you
know
geographical?
Yeah. So I went to Sydney and I found meth. Which, I was a seasoned coke addict. Meth was really dangerous.
Methamphetamine is a disaster. It was an absolute disaster.
And I was so skinny. I can't believe the amount of weight that I lost in 4 days. It was really scary. Like, you see people just bones walking around trying to scavenge money with all these potholes in their arms and faces. And it's horrible. Like, it really
was
is.
It crystal meth though? Was it the crystal version of it?
Yeah, it was.
Because that's really heavy duty. The sort of crystal version is like really like rock cocaine. So crack is rock cocaine, and that's like really, really heavy end stuff, and sort of you have to use so much of it. That's really disastrous. And so how long were you out there in Australia for?
I was there for 3 months, and I just sold my house to pay off drug dealer debt, to pay off gambling debt as well, and the money that I had left over, which, to be honest, I was in a very grateful position that I still had a fair chunk of money left over.
Yeah.
But I went to Sydney.
And this was during the time of the deregulation of gambling as well, wasn't it? When you could get it suddenly on your phone, you didn't have to go to a bookies or a casino. You could gamble through apps on your phone. That was.
Yep. Sydney was quite bad because Sydney, the only place you can drink for 24 hours is the gambling, Sydney Casino, or within that area of Sydney Casino, because the rest of it's under quite strict drinking rules where you can't drink after 12 or 11 or something. So I just gravitated towards there. I met drug dealers when I was in Sydney, sort of go to the same places, you'll see the same people everywhere. And the cost of cocaine in Sydney was $300. So the money was running out a bit too quick. So the visa only lasted 3 months. I was trying to turn professional at golf, but realistically, all I was doing was running away from my problems and hoping, living in penthouses and spending money like it was going out of fashion was the way to fix myself. But then I went to Cape Town. Of all places, I then went to Cape Town for 3 months, got involved with drug gangs, and I was this rich white guy that had come over and ended up being a target for kidnaps. So I then had to leave quite quick. I mean, I was so lucky I got out of South Africa alive, just because I was putting myself in so many dodgy positions. Without actually realizing it. Almost got arrested for picking up crystal meth again. And it's those instances at the time that you don't think anything about, but it only took like 30 seconds more. The police would have got me instead of the other guy, and I'd be in a South African prison. And then I watch all these programs about the world's toughest prisons, and you think that could have been my reality. I've probably been 10 seconds, 5 seconds away from being in prison.
Yeah,
10 times.
You wouldn't really have come back. I don't think it's realistic to imagine you survive something like that, would you?
I don't even want to think about it, to be honest. I'm just grateful that I am here, and I've hopefully learned my lessons.
Well, sounds like you have. So you come back to the UK. Do your parents know this stuff is going on, or are you managing to withhold that from them?
So I moved to Thailand back in 2016 because I just admitted that I had a coke problem. I hadn't told mum because mum had a virus thing.
They do know now, though. This is not a surprise to them.
No.
Like,
I've written.
Mum, I forgot to tell you.
Yeah, I've written 2 books, so I think my mum's
they've got the idea now.
Pretty used to it. I went to Thailand because I had drug dealers trying to. Well, they threatened to kill me and break my legs, which fair enough. They're drug dealers. They're born into that environment. It's quite normal for that to happen if you don't pay your debts. So I moved to Thailand to try and learn some self-defense and just get away again. But I had to come back and ask them for the money because it was too dangerous and I had nowhere else to turn. So they paid off the drug dealer and didn't stop me. I then got into debt again, and I then had to sell the house. I sold my Audi. I had a nice flash Audi car at the time that I had to sell because I had to bridge the gap between the house getting sold and the drug dealer's threats. So I said, look, here's the car. I'm going to sell it. You can have all the cash from that. And then because of bloody Brexit, it took a year to sell my house. And it was a nice house. Yeah. For 365 days, I was a chronic drug addict who had to keep the house clean. And I must have had at least 6 people a week coming to view the property. I mean, it's like the worst situation when you're miserably, suicidally depressed. You don't want random people coming through the door every 2 minutes.
Yeah. Oh dear. And then what? What was the next step in that story?
So I think once I'd got rid of the drug dealer, all the debts had been paid off. I paid off all my, I didn't go bankrupt, but I did something called a full and final offer with the banks. So it's almost a step before bankruptcy, which has been on my credit file for 6 years, which will end early next year, which is good. So yeah, got back from my travels.
The interest growing and all that sort of stuff, though. And then this is the amount we're going to pay, no more, and that's it. So, and you then work out a payment plan with them.
Yeah, like step change are really good. I think anyone struggling with debts, step change have been through this process a million times. And it was really helpful because it gave me a bit of breathing space. Because people don't realise, but when you're sort of suicidally depressed like I was at the time, you're getting hounded by these banks, like 10 letters a week, threats of bailiffs, and you just, on top of everything else, it's just really difficult to manage that. You've already hit every fuck it button going, so you then get all these letters, you're like, I really don't care. I mean, all those letters you keep sending aren't going to make any difference. But yeah, I was lucky there was enough money in the property to pay all that off and still managed to get to Sydney. In Cape Town, came back from Cape Town, sort of had the realization when I was running away from the threat of being kidnapped because someone tipped me off that it was going to happen that night. So I then just thought, you know what, fuck this. I'll go down the garden route, play golf for 2 weeks. So that was actually one of the best experiences on my own I've ever had. It's absolutely stunning down that part of the world, and the golf courses were really amazing. But then I just realised that I really need to get sorted. All this money I've had is pretty much gone, over 100 grand in equity that I've just spent on. All I've got left from that 100 grand is an Amazon Alexa downstairs. And luckily, like the main thing is I still have my health at the end of it. I got back into finance when I came back. Somehow managed to get a job, even with 2 years gap on my CV, working for one of the top investment firms, and then just same situation. I don't know why I went back into it, because I really hated the job. Stress started kicking back in again, and the drugs started again, the drinking, and it just all went back to the worst it was before. But this time I'd actually managed to run out of money completely. So I was actually in a position at the beginning of January 2018 where I was on a good salary, but I couldn't afford to go into work because I'd started gambling again. It's mental. Like, I was actually homeless because I couldn't afford my rent. And the thing that actually made me go to rehab wasn't necessarily that I thought I had a problem. It was the fact that I was like, I'm fucked. I need to find somewhere to live. And because I understand private medical insurance, I thought, right, I'm going to have to ring them up and just say, look, I'm really ill. I need all this help. But it was the main
Just say you had
catalyst
a
for me.
bed, somewhere to sleep, and a bit of food.
Yeah, and to be honest, the private medical insurance was brilliant because it got me into the Priory, and it was like being in a 5-star hotel for 28 days.
Yeah.
But I think the realization when I'd spent every single penny was that I was really fucked. I had no one to turn to. Friends had left. Mum and Dad were still there, but they sort of dragged them through hell.
Yeah.
And that's the best thing that ever happened to me, was losing everything again. So it wasn't the first time I'd lost everything, it was the second time.
Do you know what was different this time? Is it just accidental? You just sort of knew you had insurance and needed a break, or was there change? And then
No, I think
realization come through.
It was a bit of a realization, because that's when I was contemplating suicide. I remember waking up on the 2nd of January. I was like, supposed to go into work today, and I was like, nah, I can't. I've just been on a 2-week bender again. But mentally, I'd just been so negative for years about who I was, where I was going, how disappointing I was, comparing myself to everyone and anything. And those voices in my head were just saying, look, it's going to be, you've got 2 options. You can either fight for the rest of your life being sober, put effort into that, or you can just kill yourself now and just get it over and done with.
Okay. And so you got yourself, that was around the beginning of January, you got yourself into a rehab, is that right?
Yeah, so I went into rehab on the 9th of January.
What's really interesting for me, and you may or may not know this, because I know you then went on to qualify as a counsellor, so we'll talk about that in a minute, but it is often, because although we're joking about the crisis of Christmas and all that sort of stuff, it is the truth that people will go crazy from now onwards until sort of the first week of January, when they will stop being crazy around drink, and drugs will be involved, but mostly drink. And it's also the time when most people get recovery because of the crises that are created. Because for people already heavily using, then to add in the sort of amount that is consumed at Christmas and New Year as well can be the thing that tips people over the edge. So it's a very common story. That was it. I'd had enough. I was smashed a bit by that final push through Christmas and New Year. So you do what, 28 days detox and group therapy, and they talk to you about AA and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, it was a step-based rehab. So they basically take you through step 1 and step 2 of the 12-step program, and they make you go to AA, Cocaine Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Sex Addicts Anonymous, all the various groups, even if that's not your necessary addiction. Yeah. It was just good. And then another one that was probably one of the most enlightening was the Food Addicts Anonymous, because that made me realise that actually my addiction started at a very young age because of my overeating. And then that's what manifested then into the drinking. So it was good. It was really eye-opening.
All right.
Going to all the meetings.
You froze there for a bit, unless it was at my end, but you're back. And so it was a useful experience. You get clean and sober during that time, and you commit yourself to sobriety, I guess, to what's called abstinence.
Yeah, I think a lot of people struggle. I went there thinking, actually, you know what? I've lost everything. There's no way that I want to go back to being suicidally depressed again.
Okay.
This is my one chance to really take in everything they tell me, um, lose all the ego and everything that I thought I knew, and just have a bit of a relearning process.
Which I mean, I think is a really sensible way to approach anything like that. Is like you just got to go for it as best you can. You know, just throw yourself into it and get the most out of it that you can. To any of those types of experiences, even if you change your mind later, I think while you're in the moment, it always makes sense just to sort of give it its best shot rather than fight it and stuff like that. But for you, sobriety worked, abstinence worked. You sound all right now. How quickly did the suicidal thoughts tail off and all of that stuff?
Pretty quickly, I'd say. I think the more time you get sober, the more you realise how bad alcohol was as an escape plan.
It's not a sensible one.
Yeah, and it's strange. Like I think that the only time in the last 5 years, I'll be 5 years in January sober, that I've had depressive thoughts have just been when I've had too much stress. Like it's been positive stress, but that's I'm still nowhere near where I used to be. And that was just a brief moment of 2 weeks in 5 years.
Yeah.
So it shows how far mentally I've come, and building resilience along the way as well.
Yeah. It's always funny when people tell me they used alcohol to improve their sleep, because it actually has the opposite effect. It has a muscle relaxant in it, so we think it helps, but actually it makes us really anxious and depressed and fucks up our sleep. So alcoholics actually find when they go to rehab, their sleep comes back really quickly. It's the people on the other chemicals that don't. But so you have this positive attitude towards it. I'm just going to embrace it. I'm going to give it my best shot. You get some juice out of being sober quickly because your mental health improves relatively quickly, which again is a familiar story to me. And you think this is working okay. You get yourself out of rehab, you do 28-day stint, and you're then working at getting your life back on track. You went to AA for a while. How did you find it?
I don't know. The group element of it, I found a bit nervous at the beginning, but the messages.
Surprising, given your introduction to groups as a child, i.e., school. I mean, it's hardly surprising, and anxiety provoking, right?
Yeah. So that's something I've learned, and that's what actually AA helped me realise is that I'm an extroverted introvert to some extent, and big groups I've always struggled with. That's why I drank, and that's why I drug. Did so many drugs, because it's what made me feel at ease. So the group element was all right. It got me out of my comfort zone, and mentally, I'd say going to a meeting and sharing in front of a complete bunch of strangers how your week's been and things that have gone wrong, especially as a man, is completely against everything that I knew or ever did. And it's really good. My mental health when I was in AA, I'd say, was the most clear it's been. And strange enough, my golf had a massive improvement during AA. But I just couldn't get on with the commitment and the fact that I was being told what to do by people that were, this isn't supposed to sound elitist, but it's roofers and builders and people that don't have professional qualifications to tell me, to give me a diverse range of things that I needed to know. It was, you will follow the steps the way that everyone else has followed the steps. And it was a bit like, actually, I can appreciate elements are really powerful. The 12-step program is so good for building self-awareness and understanding how you interact in the world, but some of it's just a bit archaic. And I think it's common. Everyone in the sober Facebook group that I run are similar. We've all come out, we've all tried it. I don't think you can badmouth it because it works for so many people. But I just
it gave you a start as well in your sober journey, which is, I'm sure.
I mean, to be honest, I think that's where they do like 30 and 30 or 90 and 90 meetings. If your life is so screwed and you need to do everything and anything you can, then that accountability, that intense accountability, it can be really good. And it's almost what some people do need. But yeah, just not for me. After my year, that was it. I was just like, you know what, I've got other coping mechanisms.
Okay. And then you moved on to, is that when you started training, or is that when you started the golf course or the golf group?
Yeah, so sober. So I was a year and a half sober, and I left the finance career to set up a golf travel business. So golf's always been my big passion.
Because the big thing about fellowship or AA and those groups, I mean, there's other groups like SMART and stuff like that, just for information for people. But peer support groups, a great thing about them is that they provide company. I mean, so you don't have to be lonely. You can be irritated and annoyed, but at least you've got people you can phone and stuff like that, right? But going on your own can be a bit lonely, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And I think sober golfers came out of the fact that the travel industry is just one big piss up. I mean, there are so many drunk people working in the travel industry that it is, however bad you think British society is, that's like a microcosm of it on steroids. So every trip that I got taken to, you think, oh, it's nice and luxurious. I had a 4-day trip to Mauritius.
And you wouldn't remember it because you were so tanked up. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. I was actually sober when I was going.
Right. Yeah.
I felt uncomfortable with how much the hotels are trying to get you drunk. Everyone else is getting drunk, and it's how they do things to then promote the resorts. Yeah. I was like, nah, I don't feel comfortable with this. So luckily, COVID came along and the business didn't work out anyway. But then I decided to do sober golfers on the back of it. And then we got, from 2 of us playing in the first competition, there's now about 240 of us in the group. Half the group's in the US. Got a nice group of guys over in Ireland. Mixture of people in fellowship, mixture of people that have just gone to rehab or done addiction counsellors.
Absolutely brilliant.
Golf's the common denominator along with being sober. Like there's no, I know there's AA golf groups and stuff, but it's just everyone gets on really well and just supports everyone.
Broad church approach. Brilliant. And you've got a Facebook group that people can apply to join. It's closed, but there's some questions getting, people can join it, right?
Yeah, so
if put a link out there, I think.
Yeah, so if people are sober and play golf, then Sober Golf Society on Facebook. There's some questions, obviously, privacy of members because of that AA. We're not connected to AA, but always respect other people. Not everyone's comfortable as me talking about sobriety.
Well, hopefully one day people will be, but we're getting there. But also, as I said to you in our chat before the show, I'm really always love the idea of people who are setting up sober communities, which is what you've been doing, that extend beyond the standard AA and smart recovery groups, because I think although they're brilliant, I mean, they're fantastic things that they do, there's people, not everybody fits into them, and I think there's plenty of room for sober lifestyles which move beyond that approach. And also there's a growing sober movement which has nothing to do with addiction recovery at all, oddly enough. In London there are sober groups that exist simply because people don't want alcohol in their life when they go out clubbing, for example. And none of them have been in rehabs, and they don't need to because they don't have a problem with alcohol. The problem they have with alcohol is what it does to the environment. So like when you go out and you drink and you're around drunk people, it's unpleasant. And they don't want it. So there's lots of reasons why people are getting sober now in sober organizations. So you do that, which I always think is remarkable, people who transform experience in the way that you have, because you come from running away from drug dealers that want to kill you and almost in the worst prisons on the planet, to setting up these really great groups that are, hundreds of people that get flocking to be part of. What, have you ever thought about what it is about you? Because a lot of people would just like be really comfortable with the idea of, I escaped, a horrible death in a South African prison. I'll just get on with having a quiet life now, but somehow you haven't. Do you know why that is? I mean, what is it about you?
The thing is, people say to me, "You've done all these things." I've qualified for more jobs in the last 5 years than most people will in a lifetime. But I generally do it because I enjoy it. I enjoy learning. I think the big thing that drinking and drugging did was turn me a bit numb to the world. So the business that I run, the business that I run is called Addicted to Life. And as cheesy as that sounds, actually, that is how I feel. I feel like a full zest, and the energy I get from being sober and not living in chaos, I then put into positive things, which then create more energy. I might have ADHD to some extent. I don't know.
Don't undermine it. So your life hasn't become boring because you stopped using. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, my life is so fulfilling. I love my Mondays as much as I love my Saturday and Sundays. And for me, that was an alien concept when I was in the corporate world. I hated Mondays. I hated Sunday evenings because they were before Mondays. And that whole mentality is completely shifted because I've had to put hard work in to get everything up and running. And it's not a case of, oh, it's up and running, I still need to work on it. But I've got that balance in my life where I can play golf when I want, spend time with the missus, spend time with the puppy, which takes up a lot of time. And it's just, far removed from what I thought life was going to be like. I think having all the experiences I have just changed my mindset. So I'm grateful, whereas I never used to be grateful for what I did have. And it just keeps me driven just to do things and just try and help other people. It's not like I'm on a crusade or trying to be a martyr, but I know
you're not. I mean, it's like, it's so clear that you're not. You're just having a laugh with life. You're enjoying it, and other people are coming along for the ride, by the sounds of it. Your missus sort of knows about all of this stuff.
Yeah. She, well, I don't know how much I can talk about her, but she's been sober for almost 4 years now. We weren't in the psychiatric ward together at the same time. We were a year apart, so we were both in the Priory. Both different stories. I think if we'd met when she was a recovered alcoholic, and I guess mine was more cocaine towards the end, we would have hated each other. I mean, we would have been the most annoying couple ever. But it's nice because we just sort of get each other. And
so you have some sense of shared experience, but there's a focus on health and well-being and recovery in your lives together, and growth and development. Because there's a lot, I think, thinking about that program that you went through and the great skills, one of the things it does, I think, inculcate in people, if they allow it to happen, is a sense of wonder and joy about life, but also a sense of wonder and joy about one's own development, and really embracing growth and development. And I presume that's part of your relationship with each other, is that sense of wanting to embrace and grow and develop, be honest and be open and be authentic.
Yeah, and I think from a relationship point of view, that's been a real big change.
Yeah.
My go-to was emotionally to shut down. I think quite similar to my dad, actually.
Yeah.
Whenever Mum used to have a go at him, you just see he'd just switch off. I hope my mum never watches this, by the way. And and I used to do that in relationships. So I'm then left with the mental exhaustion of, I'm not happy with something and I'm going to keep overthinking it. Yeah. And the problem's still there because I've not spoken about it. And it is a nightmare. You're literally living in your own nightmare, which only gets worse because you continue to be in a relationship that you're not talking about the things you're unhappy about.
Yeah.
So me and April, we make sure we talk about things. Like, things are stressful, things aren't perfect, but we know with all our experience and all the various relationships we've had before, that we need to talk to each other and not leave things to overthink stuff.
Yeah. And you trained as a counsellor but decided not to do it, continuing as a career. At what point after that did you, or before that, during that, did you write the first book?
So the first book I wrote in January last year.
Right.
No, January this year. God. Yeah, January this year. I did it in 2 months.
In 1 year. It's like, this is insane.
Yeah, I wrote the book in 2 months, and I sort of already had the structure of the book in my head.
Okay.
Because
the first one?
The first one's Sober on a Drunk Planet's the book of the series, and then it's Giving Up Alcohol.
Right.
So
James will put a link out to that, and so people can grab hold of it. So you wrote it in January this year.
So when I came out of rehab, I listened to thousands of hours of Audible books.
Yeah.
And they were a big part of helping me change the way that I lived. All the things I didn't know or didn't do before, I then had all this knowledge. And I thought Audible is such a great platform for people whose brains are a bit frazzled from all the drink and drugs.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm very much an auditory learner, so listening is how I pick up stuff. But then again, obviously with writing books, I do enjoy reading as well, but I prefer listening to Audible. So I just thought, you know what, I'd like to produce a book series around sort of getting out of rehab, that process, and then developing in through sobriety.
Yeah.
So I waited until I felt like the time was right. There's some people that will write a book after 3 months of being sober because they get all this new energy.
Yeah.
And it's what I call the life coach effect. It's so powerful that they'll leave their job and they'll have this complete shift. They'll lose weight. And it's really like, it's such an inspiring thing to see when someone has completely changed their life around by removing one substance, which is alcohol.
Yeah, I know. But it's also, I think there's some value as well in waiting and hanging on as you did to when you've got a little bit of experience and wisdom to share with people. So what would be the sort of main features of the first book? I mean, in terms of the message you were getting across to people?
So the books were, the major design was not to be preachy. So from the counselling perspective, it is very much, you need to come up with your own conclusions. Addiction is very much, you're only going to save yourself at the end of the day. So the book is very much, these are the facts of what alcohol does. This is what sobriety can offer you. So it is pretty much saying alcohol's a negative in 8 areas of your life. So relationships, health, mental health, physical health, emotional health, career, sex life. And it goes through all those 8 areas, and it gives you the negatives of what alcohol might be doing. A lot of people relate to it as well. And then just giving people an idea of what sobriety looks like. And then it's very much left to them if they want to give it a go, like all those benefits are waiting for them if they want it, but no one's forcing them to do anything if they don't want to.
A rational emotive approach is what it might feel like, this is what it might think like, and etc., and allowing people to be adults making their own decisions, right?
Yeah, and I think the power of books, because I know when I listened to people in AA, strangely enough, there was a guy a couple of years above me at school that was always in and out of prison, and he was sober. And I was like, this is crazy. But listening to his story was the thing that then set the wheels in motion for me to become more comfortable and think I'm not the only one going through this.
Yeah.
So the book gives a few instances of my past. It's not a memoir. It's not designed to be like that, but it's those pockets that help people think, yeah, you know what, that's exactly what I've gone through. I can really resonate with it. Obviously, not everyone's going to resonate with everything. But so far, the feedback for the first book's been really positive.
Good. And then you thought, I haven't given myself enough challenges this year. I might as well write a second book.
All this was in between moving to a new home and getting a puppy. So I'm definitely having an extended break for a couple of months in January, I think.
I would hope so, before you break in half. And so, I mean, you've got this series of books in your mind. So this is the second in how many books do you think it'll be ultimately?
So to be honest, I think this will just be the 2 books, because I think they complement each other quite nicely. So the first book is taking you from understanding whether alcohol is holding you back or not. 9 times out of 10, it will be holding most people who read it back. And then the second book goes into how people can start to stop drinking. So where it doesn't go through any of the medical detox stuff, it goes through more of the soft skills that people can use, emotional regulation. When you used alcohol and drugs to regulate your emotions your whole life, you need to start understanding them a bit better. And sort of looking at stresses, cravings and triggers, understanding why you drink the way you drink. And sort of, it's called three.
Second book?
This is the second book. So it goes into 3 steps just to try and conceptualize it, so people have a tool that they can constantly think about when they're faced with challenges. So it goes through like self-awareness. If you don't understand that you've got a problem, how can you do any work to get out of it? I think that sort of phase I was in for years. But then you need to take actions to get out of it, and then you need the intuition to build on in order to make healthier choices on autopilot. So it's quite a straightforward book, no nonsense. It's not a memoir. It's very much a self-help guide to make people really start to rethink how they live their lives in terms of alcohol, and to try and focus more on the positives around being sober as well.
Brilliant. And as I've said to you sort of off air, but I'm going to say on air, I think I've said it once already, but I'm going to reiterate how much I value, as a professional that's been in this field 26 years, how much I value the growth of sober services such as yourself. I wouldn't, you're not a service, you're trying to help people, but this broadening of the sober communities and sober experiences. And I don't think it's accidental. I think, England is changing, the UK is changing slowly and kicking and screaming. It is changing in its relationship to alcohol, and people are beginning to genuinely, deeply understand that alcohol is a very dangerous substance. So I'll tell you about, since 2015, there's been a 20% drop in the number of young people drinking, because we've had a public health change, and hopefully we'll see that continue to grow. It's old fogies like you and me that are most at risk, although I'm more of an old fogey than you. But it is very exciting for me that there are, when I first started in this field, there were a couple of AA groups you could refer people into, and that was it. And it either worked for you, it didn't. Now in London, there's 1,500 AA groups a week, if not more. Do you know what I mean? And once you add all the other 12-step fellowships in, you're about 2,500 meetings a week in London of 12-step. And then you've got SMART on top of that. And you've got this growing sober sort of spaces, I think, like yours and other organisations that I think are brilliant. So I'm very excited about it. I think it's a really, really good move. And I love the fact that you've learned from AA, you haven't decided to diss it. You've taken the learning, you've applied it in your life, and you've moved beyond it into something else, which I think is really, really top notch. It's fantastic stuff. I would say, in my humble opinion, that's exactly what the early pioneers of AA wanted. They didn't want people to sort of blow smoke up anyone's ass, but just to get sober and have a good life, which is what you're doing, it seems to me. So all power to your elbow. We're at the end of the show. I told you it would whiz by. There's not enough time. So James will have put the link to the second book out, but just again, say what the name of it is so that people know.
Yep, so the book series is Sober on a Drunk Planet, and then you got Giving Up Alcohol and 3 Sober Steps as the 2 books.
And 3 Sober Steps is the one that you launched effectively today.
Yes, yeah.
Available through Amazon. Folks, go and buy it. It's great stuff. It's great stuff that's happening. Really cool to have you on, Sean. You stay there as I wrap up the show. And then we'll think about sort of maybe sort of bringing you back on, and be nice. I'm just off the top of my head, I'm just thinking about some of these sober golfers and maybe getting a couple of them to come along as well and chat about that, because I think it's brilliant. I really do. It's a fantastic idea. So just hang on there a sec. It's been wonderful this evening, folks. We're going to be taking a break over Christmas, but we'll do reruns, our top 10 or whatever they are, top 3 or something, sort of, which just means me randomly shuffling the pack and choosing some videos. We'll have a rerun next week, and then probably a break over Christmas, but we'll be definitely back live early in the new year. It's been a wonderful year this year. It's been sort of, last week's guest, who was a returnee, said, oh, you know, Noel, I was looking at some of your shows just to catch up on them, and the people you have on are amazing. It's the truth. Every single person, including yourself, Sean, that comes on this show blows me away. People are amazing, really extraordinary stories of change and transformation and hope. And so we're going to leave it at that. And I'll see you all in a few weeks' time. Have a very enjoyable Christmas and New Year, and stay safe. And see you in 2023. Bye-bye for now.